In recent days, a new political storm has been reignited by remarks made by US President Donald Trump, comments that many have condemned as deeply racist and xenophobic, targeting not only the Somali community in the United States but also Somalia as a nation. Many people have condemned his remarks, claiming that these statements have once again exposed how political rhetoric can shape negative public perception, fuel discrimination, and carry real-world consequences for entire communities across borders. Today's episode of Clashpoint tries to examine why Trump is picking on diaspora communities, perhaps in a country dubbed as the melting pot, where immigrants from diverse cultures shape its identity to its very core. We will also discuss how narratives about Somalia and its people continue to be shaped and distorted in Western political discourse. To bring clarity, depth, and factual grounding to this discussion, I'm joined by fellow journalist Faisal Ali. Faisal Ali is a journalist and writer from the UK of Somali heritage. He has been covering the Horn of Africa generally for more than 8 years, with a particular focus on Somalia. He has worked at TRT World, The Guardian, and is now working with Al Jazeera as a digital journalist. Faisal has also written for publications like New Lines and Africa as a Country. It's a real pleasure to have him with us today to help unpack the wider context and implications of Trump's recent remarks about Somalia and the Somali community in the US. Thank you, Faisal, for being here, and welcome to Clashpoint. For my first question here, why is Trump saying bad things about the Somali community in the US and also Somalia as a country as a whole? And why is he saying these things, and what's the agenda behind?
There's two parts of this, Isaac. Firstly, before I jump into it, thanks for having me first and foremost. I really appreciate the chance to kind of come and talk to you guys about all of this. But ostensibly, this entire furore started after Donald Trump picked up on an issue which happened in Minnesota came to light, but happened around 2 or 3 years ago, linked to an NGO called Feeding Our Future. The function of the NGO was to provide food for children who were poor during the COVID-19 pandemic, because a lot of people weren't working, as you know. Many of us were confined to our houses, and that affects some people who have particular lines of work who require them to kind of be out and be in public, and so on and so forth. Something like I'm not sure of the exact figures, but 200 to 300 million, possibly even much more than that, was stolen in fraud cases in Minnesota. And some of the people involved in that were from the Somali community. So I think out of 70 odd people, right, roughly 52, 53 were Somali, which was unfortunate. And I don't think any members of the Somali community were kind of defending this behavior or were asking for leniency for those who were involved in it. Many people even pled guilty, actually, around the case. And so that's kind of what's brought, that's what the ostensible trigger is for this particular round of discussions about the Somali community, if you want, in the United States of America. If we zoom out, there's kind of a pattern of behavior with Donald Trump with regards to the Somali community. So I think this is kind of the more important thing, that his targeting of Ilhan Omar, he called her garbage and he called the community garbage. He said she had bad friends. Obviously, he's referring to other members of Congress, which are part of her grouping, the Squad, which are progressive lawmakers, basically, who are generally opposed, really doggedly, to a lot of the policies that Trump stands for, as well as what he believes and what they believe he represents. But in any case, going back to 2017, 2018, 2019, there was that famous tweet which kind of really triggers everything for me, where he says Ilhan Omar and 4 members of the Squad should go back to the countries which they came from and sort those places out. And he was talking about them all, including Ilhan Omar, in a very derogatory way. But in addition to that, obviously, she's really strongly opposed in the past his quote-unquote Muslim ban in July 2019, when there was a rally at Greenville. He was attacking her nonstop during the rally, and then members of the audience began chanting, "Send her back, send her back, send her back." He later obviously claims that he felt bad about what was said during it, and he said that he tried to stop them and everything. But in reality, anybody who wants to look at the footage, he just kind of stands there
We
and he
all know
passes.
Trump.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the big things as well, which is often overlooked when we chart the history of the clashes between Ilhan Omar and Donald Trump, is that Donald Trump in his first term really came out as the most pro-Israel US president. You know that he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He recognizes Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. And these are all things that Ilhan Omar is also opposed to. And she's frequently calling out AIPAC and its influence in US politics.
So do you think there is a particular, like, is there a particular reason why he is speaking on her too much? Like, there are other, like, Congress members who are speaking out against American policies about the Israeli situation and stuff. But he is seen, like, always attacking Ilhan Omar as if he has, like, some personal feud against her. Why is he always, is there any particular reason, in your opinion, why he's always picking up on her more than he does it to the others? I know, like, Trump is always saying this type of things to other actors, especially in the Democratic circle. But is there a specific reason, in your opinion, why he's like picking on Ilhan Omar?
I don't think we even have to be particularly creative or reach for the explanation. You have to recall that Donald Trump was among those people who were even saying that, former President Barack Obama was born in Africa or something like that. He was part of the birther movement, which was saying that Barack Obama wasn't born in the US and therefore he shouldn't be entitled to be US president. If he can go after someone of that stature, I just don't see why it would be difficult for him to target a Somali American lawmaker who wasn't born in the country. She's the only refugee in Congress. She's the first Somali woman to hold an office that prominent. She wears the hijab in public. She's proud of her beliefs. And I would argue that Islamophobia wasn't a hindrance to Donald Trump's first campaign and his second campaign. Actually, it was a core part of his messaging. And so if there are Muslim members of Congress, Muslims in the public more widely, of course, they're going to get caught in the crosshairs of that. She also is of African ancestry. We know what Donald Trump has previously said, of course, about Africa, quote unquote. I mean, I don't like to swear, but I'm quoting him. Shithole countries is the expression he uses. We saw how Cyril Ramaphosa was treated when he visited the White House earlier this year. Insane allegations being thrown at the White House president of a white genocide happening. And, he's showing really, to call it bad evidence or inaccurate evidence is even a stretch. Some of this stuff is just not linked to South Africa at all. I remember one of the clips apparently was from the DRC. And so my personal general impression of what's driven some of his dislike or distaste or hatred even, or exclusionary politics is a broader awareness that he has that among his base there is an appetite for him to say these kinds of things, and it galvanizes people within his movement. And I think he believes there are no consequences for saying these things as well. And as we've seen, there hasn't been. He described a sitting congresswoman and an entire community, as being garbage. And a few or none of the journalists in the room, when I remember listening to the clip, even challenged him on that and said, Mr. President, is it appropriate for you to use that particular type of vocabulary about any community? I mean, we can imagine the consequences if other communities were talked about in that way. Almost immediately, there'll probably be kind of a lot of people kicking off within the Oval Office or wherever that meeting was taking place. But in any case, I think that's my impression. Is he doesn't like Africa. Obviously, he's a bit racist about Africa. But in addition to that, it galvanizes his base, and he also doesn't face any consequences for making these types of remarks on a regular basis, unfortunately. And it's not the first time he's been saying this about the Somali community. I've been following a lot of what he's been saying about Somalia and Somali community in the US for the last 3 or 4 months. On more than one occasion, he said that he spoke to the Somali president and offered to give Ilhan Omar back to the Somali president. Now, I don't know if he did say that, and the Somali president hasn't confirmed or denied whether these remarks have been made. But Isaac, just imagine saying to another president, you have somebody here in Congress, why don't you take this woman back? She's causing too much of a headache here for us. That's outrageous.
So let me come in here. Like, we've seen Trump speaking very bad stuff, like very undiplomatic stuff, politically incorrect stuff in his tenure in his presidency. We all know how he is like, but this time, speaking specifically about this time, is he specifically deliberately attacking or picking on the Somali community, or is he just is it just one of his like remarks that just are spontaneous in a way? Maybe just people believe that he is spontaneously saying some stuff that is very hard to hear. Is this this one of those like moments where just it's just in the spur of the moment he says these bad things out of hatred or prejudice towards the Somali community and immigrants as a whole, or is it a deliberate type of thing to start some type of movement or maybe appease his MAGA like social base? Is it deliberate or is it just spontaneous, as many people like to believe?
I would say that it's not spontaneous. I think if you look at a lot of the key influencers online, people like Matt Walsh, who are prominent supporters of Donald Trump. Earlier this year, there was an incident which really picked up and even reached the Somali community outside the US, in which a woman called Shiloh Hendricks racially abused a Somali child. She used the N word repeatedly. This is a child, mind you, Isaac, not a grown man, who put his hand inside her handbag and grabbed something, and then she kind of went crazy. And afterwards, if I'm not mistaken, there was a lawsuit lodged against her. I think the prosecutor went after her for misconduct, and I think partially because of the fact that the victim was a Somali Muslim, she managed to raise, I think, like $800,000 or $900,000. So I would say that there is an element of it which is definitely hatred towards Somalis on the basis of what they represent as Africans, as Muslims as well. I'd say the other part of it, obviously, is that the Somali community isn't the first community which has been targeted on this basis, and it isn't the last community which is going to be targeted on this basis. He's gone after Haitians, Mexicans, Muslims. He's gone after South Africans. He said bad things about Nigeria. At the moment, he's alleging that Nigeria is carrying out a Christian genocide. So I would argue that it's not a spontaneous or impulsive remark. I think if there is a pattern of behavior that goes back close to a decade, we have reasonable grounds to conclude that that person has a problem. And when Ilhan Omar keeps repeating remarks like he should get help, he's obsessed, she's not throwing that comment out into the air with an expectation that it won't stick or that it doesn't have empirical basis at all. She's been in his crosshairs for close to a decade. I'd say the Somali community has been he's escalated his attacks, obviously, in this term. It wasn't so bad last term. But I even remember a rally during the presidential campaign in 2020 when he was running against Joe Biden. I think he was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he says, Somalia, no government, no police, no nothing. And that remark even gets a BBC article and a political article written about it. And the Somali community is very aware of the derogatory language within which he is referring to the community. Among other things, obviously, his remarks are outdated. I mean, like the way he talks about Somalia as being a place where people are just walking around killing each other, it's just not true. That Somalia has no government. I think most Somalis will tell you that the problem isn't that there is no government, that there are too many governments. Puntland, Jubaland, Somaliland, etc., etc., etc. And so that's kind of contributing to some organizational issues and political issues back home, obviously. But in any case, I would definitely not agree that these were impulsive remarks that have been made by Donald Trump. I think he picks communities that he thinks are vulnerable, or that he thinks will be popular with his far-right base, and he just kind of bangs home the messages, garbage, that they're taking things from us, that they're not grateful to us. He's even used that messaging against other foreign leaders. Zelensky, when he was in the White House, a key part of what J.D. Vance was saying repeatedly was, you haven't said thank you to Mr. Donald Trump for all of the great things that you've done. And since then, a lot of Ukrainian diplomats and foreign ministers and etc. And the president have repeatedly said thank you, thank you, thank you, even in a kind of trolly way, if you want. But it's just it's just how they conduct their politics, unfortunately.
It's really to say things like that towards a country. We all know, like many people are of the opinion that America has caused a lot of death in Somalia, and these European governments as a whole, the Western governments, have a wider role for the problems that we currently have in Africa and also in some parts of Asia. Colonialism being one of those things that have played a huge impact in shaping the conflicts that still persist in these two continents, and to for a president to just come out and say such stuff about countries as a whole being garbages, these are very unacceptable in under normal circumstances. But how, being an expert in the region politics, how do you think is this going to be taken to be understood by the governments like Somalia and other adjacent areas? How are they going to react to this?
In terms of the reaction, I did a bit of reporting yesterday. I had to write an article about it for Al Jazeera. I spoke to a couple of Somali Americans in the US. In terms of the reaction from them, before I get to the reaction from Somalia and some of the implications for the Somali government, Somali Americans, I think, have been like brilliant in their reaction to a lot of this. Obviously, they've mobilized a lot of their political allies and the rest of the community that they live with in Minnesota and St. Paul, which are the two most. This is where the majority of the Somali community lives. So there's around 260,000 Somalis, I think, in the US. Of that, close to 90,000 live in those two cities in Minnesota. They've been on the media. They've done press conferences. Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, has come out and condemned this. Jacob Frey, the mayor, has come out and condemned this. And I think one of the most brilliant things about young Somali Americans in particular is that they've used this particular issue as an opportunity to raise awareness of other contradictions and hypocrisies in the way the US does its politics, the things that they talk about. Really popular viral video is some of your listeners may have seen it, but Somalis are saying that they were promised Minnesota 3,000 years ago, obviously mocking and parodying some of the claims made by Zionists to Palestine. There have been loads of AI images showing Somalis among the founding fathers in the US, kind of stuff like that, just to show how absurd it is in the US to be against immigration when it's a country literally built, obviously, first and foremost through genocide and ethnic cleansing of the native population, but then through immigration, waves of immigration over the course of 2 or 3 centuries to the US from people all around the world. So Ethiopian Somalis, people from Turkey, France, Germany, you name it. You'll find people from those countries there. In terms of the
That's
Somali
why they call
government,
it a melting pot, actually. They call it a
yeah,
melting pot for the same reason that it's being shaped by immigrants throughout history. And that's what America is as a whole. And for one immigrant community to call the other names and just push away, it's really ridiculous for a country that is called a melting pot.
yeah, I spoke to Faisal Ali, who's a political analyst now, but he was the principal city planner for Los Angeles, which gives you an idea of how false I think Donald Trump's claims are about the Somali community not contributing or doing anything. I mean, this is one of the most electorally successful African subgroups, and I think Muslim subgroups in the United States. Something like 15 up to like 20 Somali officials are in elected office, from local government to state level government, and then Ilhan Omar being the Somali representative for the 5th Congressional District in Minnesota. And one of the things he told me was that Somalis are practicing what America preaches. And one of the things that makes a lot of people on the MAGA right uncomfortable is that they're not just visibly Muslim and also visibly black, but they don't really water down. They tend not to, Somalis in America, water down their identities. So you'll see, I've seen a couple of people at press conferences with thobes and the kufi and markers of identity in that way. But if we segue onto Somalia, the Somali government basically had a humanitarian partnership as well with the US. So the US was a major humanitarian donor prior to the Trump administration, obviously dismantling US aid earlier this year. But the most important part of Somalia's relationship with the US is the security relationship. So Somalia is a country that's been fighting a really killer insurgency with Al-Shabaab since 2007. And then in the northeast, it's a local sub-branch of IS. The US carries out drone strikes in support of the Somali military. And I think that's probably part of the reason why the Somali government has been muted, despite the fact that Donald Trump has been making really offensive remarks about Somalia, going all the way back to February or even March, in which he's repeatedly said that Somalia doesn't have a government, there's no head of state over there, et cetera, et cetera. This is despite the fact that he has an official called Sebastian Gorka who works in the security department, I think in either in the presidency or the Pentagon, but in any case, he's the one who's coordinating the US security policy on Somalia and a lot of parts of Africa more broadly. Hamza Barre did say yesterday or 2 days ago, sorry, that we don't want to kind of make this too big an issue. I think what they're concerned about is that Donald Trump is an impulsive president in terms of policy, and that there could be serious ramifications if they too harshly hit back. But after Charlie Kirk was killed, who was a popular figure on the American right, who held quite provocative and often very racist views, Ilhan Omar criticized him, and she came under fire back then. Donald Trump called her scum that time as well. It didn't make huge global news in the way that this particular incident has. But he also said Somalia is a country plagued by violence and poverty and loads of other things. During that round of interactions between Ilhan Omar and Donald Trump, Somalia's defense minister, Muallim Fiqi, came out and said, if you're attacking, and these are his words, our daughter, we will come and stand by her. And we won't permit this to kind of continue without any response from us. That was as far as I've seen the Somali government go, Isaac. Unfortunately, they haven't been more forthright. I spoke to Abu Kararman as well yesterday, who was the former Somali envoy to the US, who said, rightfully the Somali government is concerned that there could be consequences which outweigh what would be gained by making a remark, basically. He said that Donald Trump is prone to imbecilic behavior, and so there's no use provoking that at a time like this. And I suppose the assessment is that they just have to survive 2-3 more years, and then the hope would be more predictable US presidents would kind of come to power in the White House, with whom the Somali government could continue productive engagement. But I think it's just that concern about jeopardizing security partnership with the US, which is causing Somali governments to be restrained and diplomatically tight-lipped about how they're dealing with this issue. And I think tight-lipped is an understatement. They've been silent.
Okay, so how do you think is this going to affect the Somali community, especially the diaspora in the US? How is this going to affect them? I've seen remarks made by Ilhan Omar saying this is going to put them in danger. Is that really true? Like, is this going to affect how people live their lives, especially the Somali community? How is this going to affect them in places where they do not live in huge numbers? Are they going to be attacked, or are there any signs of this becoming a catastrophe for the Somali community? And how do you rate the response? Like, is this an organized response that they're going for? Is this just like disunited in dealing with such remarks, or is it really organized?
I think when Ilhan Omar says that the remarks put her in danger and put other members of the community in danger, she's not speaking hypothetically, Isaac. In Minnesota, just earlier this year, a Minnesota lawmaker, I think she was in the parliament for that particular state, basically, was killed along with her husband. Obviously, Ilhan Omar has kind of protection, and she said this in a New York Times article, which was published, I think, yesterday or the day before that. But for the rest of the community, it obviously has been a cause of alarm. And it's not just the possibility that you have vigilantes coming after Somalis in Minnesota. But there were broader concerns. I mean, ICE was sent to Minnesota in order to carry out sweeps of anybody who was undocumented. The silly thing about that, which has been pointed out by Ilhan Omar and others, is that I think close to 87% of Somalis are American citizens. Some 60% of that are people who were born in the US. And so this is not a community which, I mean, it wouldn't be fine if they were undocumented, but this is not a community where using that particular tool will be helpful. And there have been TikTok videos which have gone viral of Somalis kind of showing their passports and being like, excuse me, don't bother attempting to detain me or harass or bother me in any kind of way.
So
There
what
was also
happens to those Somalis who might be, like, for example, a US citizen, but at the same time they don't have their passports with them? Are they going to be attacked? Are they going to be harassed by the police? This is really ridiculous, according to what people are saying and commenting on social media.
Definitely things can go wrong. I mean, ICE is not like foolproof. Whether legal or not, we're seeing people detained. Sami Hamdi obviously was a case that you and I will both know about that happened last month. He hadn't broken any laws, as far as we're concerned, or as far as we know so far. It was opinions which he expressed that led to ICE detaining him. it's just not a wise way. And there's a woman who in the report I wrote yesterday said a lot of the businesses in her area have been shut down because of people who are concerned about ICE kind of coming and harassing them and possibly arresting the wrong people. Jacob Fry, the mayor, said people ought to be careful because even if they look Somali, according to how an ICE agent would determine what a Somali looks like, right? A lot of people could potentially be arrested, Isaac. You could be African American, you could be Ethiopian, you could be Sudanese, etc. And so
And this
I
has
think
happened in the past in the history of America. This has happened. There were times where some nationals were held in stadiums, and there were mass incarcerations in the country because the country. I mean, even though it's not what Hollywood paints it to be, you've had lots of problems. America has just not even finished supporting a genocide for an apartheid government, which many, according to many human rights organizations, and usually, like they claim, for example, Trump's remarks about the third world countries, calling them garbages, and other like very offensive wordings that he uses. But at the same time, you've seen lots of freedoms being taken back. Like the West is not what it used to be 10, 20 years ago. I mean, it's freedom of speech. And people are being arrested for protesting, as you've seen in the last like many protests that have been going on. It's not like America is what it used to be, even in terms of democracy, human rights, and these things are changing. But at the same time, President Trump is going after countries, calling them unacceptable names, politically incorrect. All these things create a lot of questions among people, especially on social media, because I've done a lot of monitoring on that. People are saying, what moral grounds does America, the United States, have to call these countries any names? It has not even like called out the genocide. It has supported, sponsored a genocide between our eyes, like live streamed, so that nobody could deny it. So people are really upset, and the Somali community is also upset based on the monitoring that I've done. And all this, when it has like physical implications on in people's life, it's going to be a lot of chaos for especially for the Somali community. And I could guess that happening. But do you see this hurting Somali-US relations in the future? Because as you know, the US has been increasing its military operations in the Horn, and it for the Horn countries as a whole. Do you think this has no bearing, diplomatic bearing, on the issues going forward? You've mentioned that the Somali government has chosen not to speak anything about it for the moment, but is this going to continue? I mean, is there going to be any type of accountability in the future where the relationship between these countries might be affected by what President Trump is saying in that regard?
I personally don't expect Somali officials to move in a direction that would potentially undermine, harm, or potentially even degrade relations with the US, on the basis that I think the US has become kind of yeah, I don't like to use this word, unfortunately, but it's just the truth, an indispensable security partner for Somalia. So the Somali government doesn't have kind of alternative countries it could turn to train its soldiers, to conduct regular airstrikes. Something like 120 airstrikes have been carried out over the course of this year, which is unprecedented. I don't think any. Well, I think. Yeah, I can't think of any U.S. president who's carried out that many airstrikes in just 1 year. Like during Donald Trump's last term, I think he did like 220 airstrikes in total. So Isaac, that gives you an idea. I don't know what the next 4 years, 3 years are going to look like if he continues on this trajectory. Either those armed groups will be defeated, or a lot of airstrikes will continue. But what some people have identified, I mean, there have been writers, Somali writers, and people online who have kind of pointed to this, is that a lot of the violence which is being reaped by the US in Somalia, there have been victims of the airstrikes with civilians, for example, is kind of coming home, unfortunately. And I don't think that the Somali government has the leverage or the diplomatic heft even to make a public statement about the issue. And I would even question whether they have the ability to even raise the issue behind closed doors with the US resident ambassador in Mogadishu. let alone the Somali ambassador to the US, for example, going to the White House in order to make that point. The White House and the Oval Office are incredibly hostile places for people who are not necessarily in good standing with the Trump administration. And I think rightfully a lot of people are trying to avoid being around JD Vance and Donald Trump, because if you catch him on a bad day, not only will he attempt to humiliate you publicly before the international media, but in addition to that, there will be very material and serious consequences for the citizens and civilians for whom you're responsible. I just want to remind the audience that Somalia is barely even a post-conflict society. So for 30 years, there's been a raging violent war in the country. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. Many remain displaced within the country. South central Somalia, large parts of South central Somalia are under the control of an armed group called Al-Shabaab, which has its own vision for governance for the country. And then in the northeast, where the US has carried out the majority of its airstrikes, a franchise of Daesh IS has kind of emerged, which has risen in terms of its stature within the IS organization globally over the course of the last year, to the extent that some US intelligence officials have briefed their own media, so NBC, MSNBC, and others, that the head of IS Somalia could well be the head of IS globally. I personally doubt that. And a lot of experts that I've spoken to over the course of the last year also doubt that. I think that would probably be something that they're saying in order to create justification and pretext to be able to allow a lot of these strikes to kind of carry on. But in any case, over there, the US airstrikes and one or two, I think, ground incursions into parts of Puntland are supporting Puntland authorities who are carrying out a major offensive against IS Somalia, which is around 12 to 1,300 people, of which half of them are foreign nationals. So the majority of that organization, as far as I understand, are not Somali. They're from a lot of countries across Africa, and then Puntland officials have found like Argentine passports, Tanzanian passports, Bengali passports, a lot of countries you probably wouldn't even expect to have nationals roaming around a very remote part of northeast Somalia. And so that's the kind of backdrop against which a question about what the Somali government ought to be doing or ought not to be doing plays out. I'd say the second thing is that these people are not, a lot of the Somalis in the US probably aren't US Somali nationals. And so other than the fact that they are Somalis, it wouldn't even be a case of the Somali government concerned about people from people who carry its own passport, so legal citizens of the Republic of Somalia. So they probably feel like they can sit or should sit this one out, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one last remark on the U.S. increasing its military operations in the Horn and also its ambitions for Puntland. Do you see anything changing in the region? Do you see any change coming, and how is this going to influence the Horn countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, and other countries? The fact that the U.S. is increasing its military presence in there.
So the US carried out its first airstrike under Donald Trump in February this year, I think, and to a lot of fanfare as well, because I think this is one of the only strikes that I've seen that literally everyone from Sky News, I reported on it, loads of different media outlets kind of picked up that one strike to say Donald Trump has started and he's going after IS Somalia. There wasn't a lot of context about what was going on, but in any case, Puntland started the offensive against IS Somalia after IS carried out a major attack against some of its forces in December at the end of last year. They've obviously been concerned about the presence of the organization for a while, but the impression was that the organization was so small and badly staffed and so poor that it wasn't necessarily worth wasting too much of a resource in order to go after it. That doctrine flipped on its head, and now Puntland's authorities have kind of gone gung-ho into the Al Muscat Mountains, which are the northern part of Somalia that face the Gulf of Aden. As far as I understand from Puntland officials who I've spoken to, they appreciate the support that the US has given them. So it's been airstrikes. The largest airstrike carried out from an aircraft carrier was done this year by the US in their history. So for days, a part of Somalia was just continuously being bombed and bombed and bombed and bombed. In other cases, it's been airdrops of supplies, Isaac, so weapons, food, and other kinds of stuff in order to support Puntland security forces during their offensives. And so the feeling that they have about it obviously is different. But I think for people who are looking at other stuff as well, including civilian casualties, for example, for me, that's been an interest from my perspective. An old man was killed in September who was a clan chief in the town or near the town of Bodhan in the Sanag region, which is one of the parts that the US has been carrying out airstrikes, but also where Puntland has been doing its armed offensive. And I've spoken to doctors and hospitals in Bosaso, which is a city in northeast Somalia as well, near the battlefields, who have told me that loads of people have been brought in who have exhibited wounds clearly from airstrikes. I've spoken to another man who said his entire family had been killed as a result of some of these airstrikes. And so I think that the security gains notwithstanding, and I've attempted to kind of fairly present that side of it because it is a serious risk for the Somali government, but also civilians in that area. But the other side of the US armed engagement with Somalia is that a lot of people are still killed, and people are attempting to draw a straight line between the violence which is happening there and some of the violence which is, as I was saying earlier, some of the violence which has come home to the Somali community in the form of ICE, in the form of this kind of rhetoric that we've seen directed at them. And I think it's not an exaggeration, definitely, to say that there is kind of racist intent and there's malice on the part of the Trump administration in the way that it kind of thinks about and engages with a lot of these issues. If there's a problem in Somalia, just bomb it. Doesn't make a difference who dies and who doesn't. If there's a problem with the Somali community in the US, just send ICE. Who cares if these people are naturalized or not? It's a refusal to meaningfully engage with that. And Ilhan, in one of her interviews following this insane tirade by the US president, said, he won't even sit with and engage her properly, as he does a lot of his other opponents, including Putin, for example. He's been very keen to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping on more than one occasion. In the past, he was the same president who went to see the North Korean leader. He doesn't have a big problem meeting people with whom he disagrees. He met Zoran Mamdani, of course. Zoran Mamdani really impressed him and even allowed him to call him fascist. Do you remember that little joke that they had between one another?
That was very weird. Yes.
Yeah, it was insane. But over the course of the last 8 years or so, he hasn't really had that type of an interaction with Ilhan Omar. I'm not sure if she would accept it, to be honest. But my point is that that bridge hasn't been built. And so that's just something to consider for listeners.
Yeah, thank you for coming to the interview and being a guest on Clashpoint, Faisal. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
That brings us to the end of today's conversation. We've examined how political rhetoric can travel far beyond podiums and press conferences, shaping narratives, reinforcing harm, and affecting real communities in lasting ways. Thank you for listening. Until next time, don't forget to like and share the video. Leave us a comment below so we know your opinion on the matter. Do follow us on our social media accounts for notifications. You can enjoy other episodes of Clashpoint on the channel. Until next time, stay informed.